So you're looking for a new tech tree to play, and you're wondering if the American Air Force's tech tree is right for you. Hey everyone, Tankenstein here. Whether you're a new player, a pro, or somewhere in between, this guide is for you, as I will go over pretty much everything that you need to know and what you can expect as you grind through the American Air Force's tech tree. I'll give some general strengths and weaknesses that you can expect with American aircraft, as well as what each tier of aircraft will play like. In each tier, I'll pick which planes I feel like are the standouts that are great to play or to use in order to grind, and which ones you may want to avoid. I'll even mention how each tier of premium aircraft tends to be, noting some of the standout aircraft in each group. I'll even describe the close air support capabilities of each tier. Because this is a brand new series, please let me know if you think that I should add anything or remove anything in order to make this more of a complete guide. But with that being said, let's get into it. Now to start this off, I'll give some general traits of the American Air Force's tech tree as a whole. First and foremost, there are lots of multi-role strike and close air support aircraft, more than pretty much every other nation. In fact, even fighters can typically carry a decent bomb load compared to fighters from other nations, especially when considering vehicles like the P-47 and P-51, though this trend both predates and postdates these mentioned vehicles in the US Air Tech Tree. A second thing to know is that the American Air Force's tech tree may very well have the most planes in game, so that's very important. Third, these vehicles have an emphasis on versatility. Most planes don't have incredibly powerful armaments in this tech tree, but they're among the fastest in game and have fairly good maneuverability. And finally, each plane typically carries a good amount of ammunition, meaning that the Americans are great for fans of gunfighters. And now with that said, let's get into the general strengths and weaknesses of this tech tree, and I'll start off with its strengths. Most planes, whether they are fighters or strike aircraft, are fairly well balanced, with a decent mix of speed, maneuverability, ground attack capability, and decent enough firepower, whether you're talking about missiles or just straight up guns. Second, there is plenty of variety in terms of what type of aircraft you can play due to the massive amount of aircraft in this tech tree, with a few planes for every type of playstyle, whether you like interceptors, bombing, missiles, dogfighting, CAS, or whatever. There are even bombers that were converted to strike aircraft and have 75mm cannons in order to destroy tanks, or heck, if you want, you could even use those to destroy other aircraft. Third, the bombers are typically very sturdy and will take a ton of damage before they're destroyed. Plus, they can carry more bombs than most other nations. Fourth, the jets tend to be exceedingly multi-role, especially in higher BRs, which means that they make for great CAS and base strike planes, as well as fairly good fighters, though some like the F-4 Phantom II tend to be on the heavy side. And finally, most prop planes, especially naval aircraft, strike aircraft, bombers, and P-47 variants, tend to be fairly durable and can take a beating before finally dying. Now with that said, let's get into the weaknesses. Through essentially the early jet era, though of course some superprop naval aircraft have cannons, almost every aircraft uses HMGs exclusively, at least in terms of overall numbers in this tech tree. While most of the mid to high BR aircraft with HMGs can equip the excellent incendiary tracer belts, most fighters and even some bombers from other nations have some sort of 20mm plus cannons, which are typically far deadlier than HMGs, though at the cost of course of being able to carry fewer shells than the typical 50 cal rounds that the Americans can carry. Second, there are very few if any planes that would be considered the best in any one role. American planes are rarely the fastest, most maneuverable, or have the best air-to-air firepower, but as stated before, these traits tend to be much more well balanced compared to other nations. And finally, the Americans really don't have many small aircraft, with most tending to be fairly average size or even somewhat large, making them somewhat easier targets to hit, especially with guns and cannons. Now with that general overview over, let's get into the tiers and how each of them play, and like I said, I'll go over everything that I mentioned in the intro. And we're going to, of course, start with Tier 1. This is obviously the start of all of it, and right from the get-go, you can pretty much tell that the Americans like aircraft that can more or less do everything. The P-26 is a great example, as it will likely be your first aircraft that you use in this tree. It doesn't have the best maneuverability, but has slightly better than average speed, and as most American planes have the ability to do, it can also carry bombs, which makes it surprisingly capable for reserve tier CAS. Another thing that you'll probably notice is that they have very well developed strike aircraft early on, which comes largely in the form of dive bombers and torpedo bombers at this BR, as well as bomber lines, of which have more planes planes than almost every other tech tree at this BR. This trend continues as the Americans love bombing enemies. In short, however, Tier 1 American planes are essentially the building block for everything else that will come in this video. In general, they are average to somewhat subpar in terms of machine guns, with the exception of the P-36s, and they also tend to have better close air support and bombing capabilities than other aircraft, again with the exception of the P-36. Performance-wise, Tier 1 American aircraft tend to have average to somewhat above average speed and average-ish maneuverability, though some might consider Americans to be somewhat subpar in this tier in that regard. Now with that said, for these standout aircraft, I would say that they are the P-26A-34M2, the P-36C, and the TBF-1C. Now for the best in CAS, I would say the SB-2U2, the TBD-1, and the F-3F2. Now for possible planes to avoid, in this instance I'll say none. All aircraft at this BR are fairly homogeneous and mostly decent, so I really can't say that there's one bad plane or another, and they're all pretty easy to actually grind for. Now for the best of premium tier 1, I'd probably say Galler's F3F2, and likely not the B10. All premiums in rank 1 for the Americans are either just premium versions of regular tech tree aircraft, or they're not very good. Again, the B10, I've used it several times, not my thing. It gets shot out of the sky very, very easily. Very slow and doesn't have much defensive capabilities. And now for tier 2. You basically see more of tier 1 in tier 2, except of course, stronger. You even start seeing more specialized aircraft that can also be used in multiple roles, if that makes any sense, like the P-39, P-38, and the P-40. While these are all intended for anti-air in general, they all have the ability to carry anti-ground ordnance in differing capacities, which makes them all fairly decent against ground targets, as opposed to other nations that either forego any anti-ground ordnance or simply carry less of it than Americans do with their fighters. You also see the introduction of several mainstay aircraft, including but not limited to the P-51, F-4 Corsair, F-4F, and F-6F, the B-25, A-20, and far more. Again, while all of these aircraft have their desired roles, such as the B-25 as a bomber, it also has MGs in order to attack enemy aircraft or strafe ground targets, whereas the P-51 and F-4 both are primarily used to fight enemy aircraft, but have substantial CAS loadouts at this tier. Again, these trends will more or less continue and expand throughout the American air tech tree. In general, you can expect fairly average or even above average armament in this tier compared to other nations, as well as above average CAS and bombing capabilities. Speed is a bit above average, and maneuverability for these vehicles tends to be a little bit subpar. Now, for the standout planes at this tier, I would say the P-39N0, the P-51 C-10, especially with the tracer belts equipped, F-4U-1D, the F-4F and F-6F, and of course the B-25J-20. There are a lot of great aircraft at this tier, especially when looking at around 3.0 BR and above. Now for CAS, I would say the best of the best at this tier are going to be the A-36, any variant of the P-39, the F-4U-1D, the SB-2C4, the P-40F-10, and any of the B-25s, and of course the A-20. Now for possible planes to avoid, I would say the P-400 and maybe the B-34. The P-400 has mediocre performance, but benefits from being the lowest BR P-39 variant, and the B-34 has a decent-ish payload, but really doesn't have a great defensive armament. Now for the premium tier 2 aircraft that I would recommend, I'd say the KI-43-2, which I prefer over the KI-61 due to it having a lower BR, lower cost, and arguably better performance, again, at least relative to BR. And before I continue, you might say to yourself, well, Tankenstein, you're adding almost every plane to the standout planes or the best for CAS, and very few to the possible planes to avoid. Well, I'm not adding all that many, and honestly, again, a lot of these aircraft are actually pretty damn good. There's not really a lot of bad aircraft, but I'm trying to pick out the best of the best. Now that said, for tier 3, this is where we start getting much more into close air support and bombing focus, with the arrival of the P-47, B-17, F-8, F-1, P-61, and others. In short, a lot of these aircraft are listed as fighters, though function more as strike aircraft, while the bombers just carry many tons of bombs. Tier 3 is where you start seeing large engines, robust airframes, better survivability, and even more 50 cal HMGs, which means that while they don't have a home run hitting firepower, tier 3 American American aircraft tend to have much more ammo, excellent incendiary tracer belts, and more consistent damage overall. With this all considered, Tier 3 American aircraft tend to be faster than other nations, a bit less maneuverable, much better in terms of close air support, with nearly every aircraft being able to carry a decent payload, and fairly decent, if not pretty good, level of armament. The true versatility of the Americans starts showing here at Tier 3, as well as their fondness for heavy bombers. Now for standout planes, I would say all of the P-47. Seriously, they are all fantastic, though especially the D-25 variant. But of course there are other standout planes including the P-51D5, the F-8F1 Bearcat, and the B-26. Now for best for CAS, I would say the F-6F5N, the F-8F1, P-47D25 and D28 variants, P-63A10, P-61C1, P-51D5, and the F-4U4. Like I said in the intro to this video, the Americans have such versatility that many of the best fighters are also the best CAS aircraft. That goes for pretty much every tier. It's just really crazy how many of them can carry bombs, and actually a pretty good amount of them as well. Now for possible planes to avoid, I would say kind of the P-47 N-15. Not because it's bad, but because the other P-47s are a touch more versatile, leading the N-15 to be a bit redundant. Now for premium Tier 3 aircraft, I would say the XP-50, BTD-1, and the Bf-109F4. The XP-50 is well known to be a troll aircraft that has ridiculously high altitude by the time it starts actually fighting enemy aircraft, whereas the BTD-1 is more for CAS, and the Bf-109F4 is a really good overall fighter. And now for Tier 4. American planes start getting really fast here, develop more strike-oriented aircraft, and largely maintain their same armament at this tier as what they had in previous tiers. While traditional fighters such as the P-51 variants at this tier aren't carrying much more than a Tier 3 aircraft in terms of bombs or rockets, the A-26, the AD family of strike aircraft, and B-29 see a massive increase in their ground attack and ordnance carrying capability, either through increase in their overall firepower, bomb load, ability to carry large rockets, or a combination therein. The B-29, while a sitting duck in many instances, can carry more bombs than almost every other bomber in War Thunder, while the AD strike aircraft family, as well as the A-26, can carry a great mix of guns, bombs, and rockets to directly strike enemy ground vehicles and bases, while being able to do so somewhat quickly, and also while being able to defend themselves, at least to a point. While somewhat sparse in terms of how many aircraft are at this tier, this is still a very powerful tier for the Americans, and represents the cream of the crop for their propeller-driven aircraft. Overall, the fighters at this tier tend to be faster than other comparable fighters, with average maneuverability, great ground attack, and somewhat subpar firepower insofar as its MGs are concerned. Now for the standout American aircraft of this tier, I would say both P-51s, the F-8F1B, the F-7F1, the AD-4, and of course the A-26B-10. I've excluded pure bombers in this tier because from here on out, they are essentially food for enemy fighters. The B-29 is amazing if it survives, but that's a big if. Now for best for CAS, I would say the F-82E, the F-8F1B, the AD-4, the AM-1, both P-51s, and the XA-38 Grizzly, which is a premium aircraft. And for possible planes to avoid, I would say maybe the B-29, but only because its repair cost is so high. It also fights jets and is an extremely attractive target for enemies. Now for premium Tier 4 aircraft to recommend, I would say the X-838 only if you plan to use it specifically for CAS, and the P-47M1RE if you ever get the chance to purchase it. It's basically just a superior P-47 compared to basically every other P-47 in the regular air tech tree, just in terms of overall performance, and if I'm not mistaken, in terms of secondary ordnance. Now with that said, we're getting into Tier 5. This is where we get into jets. Believe it or not, early jets aren't necessarily a big increase in performance over the super props that you see in Tier 4, especially the earliest jets like the F-80A5 and the F-84B26, though their top end speed is definitely better than what you see with props. With that said, we start seeing more cannons, faster firing HMGs, on planes that still carry HMGs, and a heavier payload carrying capability. With the exception of the F9F8, this is where the last of the pure gunfighters exist with the Americans. The fighters have an excellent mix of speed and maneuverability, relative of course to this BR, and the strike aircraft can destroy anyone on the ground with ease. Literally every aircraft outside of the F2F2 can carry at least 2,000 pounds of bombs, though most can carry far more. American aircraft at this BR tend to have less firepower than most other aircraft, though have good speed and somewhat above average maneuverability. They also have tier-leading CAS capabilities, being able to carry large amounts of anti-ground ordnance and of course can strafe ground targets fairly well. This is where the myth of the multi-role American aircraft that dominates CAS truly begins. Oh, and the F9F8 is also currently the lowest BR American aircraft capable of carrying missiles, which is awesome. That plane is a lot of fun. Now, in my opinion, the standout aircraft of this tier are the F-84 B-26, the F-80C-10, the F-84F, and the F-86A5 due to BR matchup considerations. Now for the planes that are best for CAS, I would say the F-3D1, all of the F-9F variants, all F-84 variants, including the F-84F, and of course the A-2D1. Now for the possible planes to avoid, I can't say that there are any planes that you might want to avoid here, though it can be tough playing the B-57, as kind of like it is with the B-29, it's just an attractive target. Now for the premium aircraft I would recommend, pretty much just the A-2D1. This thing is fast, it is really fun, it's great for CAS, and it can also grind really well in air battles. And now here we are, Tier 6. Tier 6 is a possible favorite rank for me, as it sees many firsts in terms of air combat. You start getting aircraft with ballistic computers, which help tremendously versus ground targets. You start getting good missiles and the ability to counter them. You start seeing afterburners, and you see an overall increase in speed and firepower, though at least in most cases a decline in maneuverability, which is especially notable on the AV-8C and F-104 models. In all, this is where the American air tech tree starts to use gear. It isn't as crazy as Tier 7 aircraft, but aircraft like the AV-8C, F-3H2, and your various A4 variants cement this as a great rank to play. Multi-role tends to be the name of the game here, as most aircraft can be used in both dogfights and in close air support with good success, though things like the A4 Skyhawks and AV-8C are obviously best suited for CAS compared to other aircraft in this tier. As stated before, aircraft in rank 6 tend to be fairly fast, well armed, though lacking in maneuverability. Ground attack capabilities become truly great in rank 6, and air-to-air missiles, while not amazing, see an increase in capabilities, with the AIM-9G being present again on the aforementioned AV-8C, and even the radar-guided AIM-7Cs on the F-3H2 Demon. Though these are among the worst radar-guided missiles in War Thunder, but hey, radar-guided missiles really aren't all that bad even at their worst. American aircraft at this tier tend to have great speed, acceleration, and firepower, but largely lack maneuverability. Now for the standout aircraft at this tier, I'll say the F-104A, the A4B, and the AV-8C. For those that are best at CAS, I'll say the A4E, the A4B, the A10 Early, the AV-8A and C, the F-100D, the F-3H2 Demon, and the FJ-4B. Now for possible planes to avoid, some people may say to avoid the F-100D, but personally I love it. I find it hard hitting and it has fairly good missiles for 9.3 BR. Though again, if there's going to be any plane that I feel like most people are going to dislike, that might be the one to avoid. For my premium selections at this tier, though not premium, the A4E Early is amazing and is a squadron vehicle. For true premiums, I'd say to select the AV-8A at this BR before selecting the A10A Early, though the A10A Early can be excellent in the hands of a competent player in Air RB and is amazing for ground RB and CAS. And now here we are just about at the top, but just before it, we are at Tier 7. This is a supercharged version of Tier 6. The fighters are faster, heavier, have more ordnance carrying capabilities, and can carry better missiles, with some aircraft being able to maneuver very well. The strike aircraft in this tier, such as the F-105 and F-111, are amazing insofar as being able to carry ordnance, and can easily wreck bases in the RRB, allowing for a relatively easy grind, and can also annihilate tanks in ground RB with dumb bombs, rockets, and even guided missiles. Further, we see the introduction of one of the most prominent aircraft in all of War Thunder, the F-4 Phantom II, of which has a rocky start with the F-4C as it can't carry countermeasures as of current, though these countermeasures thankfully come with the F4E variant that's also at this tier. Regardless, all variants of the Phantom II can carry heinous amounts of ordnance, including guided anti-ground weapons, radar-guided anti-aircraft missiles, and gun pods. With the exception of the A-10 and A-7 variants, every aircraft at this BR can go supersonic. But in all, every aircraft in Tier 7 for the Americans is multi-role in some way, whether primarily being a ground attack aircraft and being able to gun down or fire missiles at opposing aircraft, or in the case of the F-5E, being a thoroughbred fighter, though having the ability to carry the amazing AGM-65B guided missiles at ground targets. This tier of aircraft allows you to pick however you want to kill whatever enemy that you choose in your preferred game mode with whatever plane you desire to use. The level of versatility encountered at this tier is essentially unique to the Americans, as every aircraft can carry huge amounts of anti-ground ordnance and a good amount of missiles as well. While the aircraft at this tier are wide-ranging in terms of their overall design, it can safely be said that Tier 7 American planes have excellent firepower, great speed and acceleration, great close air support capabilities, and depending on the aircraft, good or bad maneuverability. The F-5E is an example of great maneuverability, with the F-4 Phantoms having pretty mediocre maneuverability, though some might say otherwise. Now, for my standout planes at this tier, I'll say the F-4J, the F-5E, the A-10A Late, and the F-111A Aardvark. For best for CAS, I would say the F-4E, the A-10 Late, the A-7D and E, the F-105D, F-111A, A-6E Tram, and the F-5E, and I really love the F-5E because it can carry those Mavericks. As a fighter, it is wonderful. For possible planes to avoid, while the F-105D is powerful, it gets shot down very easily, especially in Air RB, as it lacks countermeasures and isn't very maneuverable, though of course it can still be extremely effective, especially in ground RB. For premium aircraft at this tier, I would say to go for the F-5C and the A-6E Tram, especially the Tram if you want CAS. And here we are at the very end of the video. At least as of current, Tier 8 is the highest tier in War Thunder, and it represents the strongest aircraft in the game. Because of how Americans build their planes, these are essentially the ultimate multi-role aircraft, though have much better air-to-air capabilities than previous aircraft in this tech tree, with radar-guided missiles truly coming into their own. Because of the prevalence of excellent radar systems, advanced missiles, and guided ordnance, Tier 8 can be described as advanced warfare, where smart technologies have taken over, replacing huge amounts of ordnance with precision. Because of this, while ground attack payloads have become slightly smaller, they are arguably even deadlier now, as the number of smart weapons has greatly increased in relation to the number of dumb weapons, like rockets and freefall bombs. Of course, you still have the option to use dumb weapons, and they have ballistics computers to make them easier to aim, but they are less relevant now compared to any other place in the tech tree up to this point. Planes have excellent speed, maneuverability, the highest rates of climb in War Thunder thus far, great avionics, and fantastic CAS capabilities. While not perfect, as Russian aircraft have things like the R-27T that Americans don't quite have an equivalent for, at least as of yet, American aircraft have good missiles for both close and long ranges, with the F-14 even being able to carry up to 6 Phoenix missiles that can be fired simultaneously and can track individual and different targets. This is where the multi-role ethos of the American Air Force truly begins to peak, at least in War Thunder. Every plane here, with the exception of maybe the F-14A, can perform any role in whatever way that you want, and it will do it well. Pretty much every aircraft at this tier has excellent speed, maneuverability, firepower, CAS capabilities, avionics, and pretty much anything else that you can think of. These, as of current, are the best of the best, and it's only going to get better from here, at least insofar as capabilities are concerned. But with that said, for the standout aircraft of this tier, and as of current, there aren't a ton of Tier 8 aircraft in War Thunder, even for the American Air Tech tree, so the standouts are the F-16A, F-16C, F-14B, and the F-15A. For those that are best with CAS, I would say both the F-16A and C. Possible planes to avoid, not that you should avoid using it, but the F-16 ADF isn't really necessary. If you have the spare RP and SL to grind for it, honestly it's a great addition, but it isn't necessary in order to enjoy the American Air Tech tree. Plus it lacks ground attack ordnance. Though of course, it has radar-guided missiles, whereas the F-16A does not, so like I said, this is your call. And now for my recommended premiums of Tier 8. As of writing this video, there's only one premium aircraft in Tier 8, and that is the F-20 Tiger Shark. Personally, I love it. Statistically speaking, it shouldn't be as good as how well I've played with it, if that makes any level of sense. It doesn't really have great air-to-air loadout, in that you can either carry up to 6 AIM-9Ls, which are decent but not great at this BR, or 2 AIM-9Ls and 2 AIM-7Fs, which are radar-guided missiles. So it's a little bit lackluster in that regard, but it has excellent overall performance, and even has pretty good CAS capabilities. So in my opinion, I really like it. I do have a review for it if you guys want to check that out, but again, it's a little bit limited, and it's not quite as good as the F-16, even in the base variants of that plane. Additionally, I kind of suspect that the F-14A Late will come in the future as a premium vehicle in this tech tree, at which case I would probably recommend that, maybe even over the Tiger Shark. But that being said, thanks so much for watching. That is it for this video. This is kind of a guide, overview, whatever you want to call it. Let me know in the comments below if you guys have anything that you want to see in the future, any sort of addition to this type of video, some things maybe to remove in order to make this video better. Sometimes things get better by subtracting, so just let me know and I will definitely take it into consideration. By the way, thanks so much for watching, especially if you stuck around to this point. Please consider liking, commenting, and especially subscribing, as that means the world to me. But either way, thanks again, and I'll see you all on the other side. Take care, everyone.